Hello. I want to talk about two recent cases, shocking cases that I think highlights some of the very real social problems we're facing in this country, and I think they're both symbolic of a rise in extremism. Unfortunately, that's the issue I want to discuss. I'm not trying to make any statement of the two cases being exactly the same or anything like that, but they are both shocking, and I think there's a lot of commentary to be had around them. I'm going to try and keep this video restricted. I'd actually previously uploaded it, but I deleted that because the time was just I got a bit carried away. So I'll try my best not to go too long. Yeah. So the first case occurred just over a week ago in Worcester, um, and what had happened was three men threw acid in the face of a 3-year-old in yeah, saying it is just in a home bargain store in the city centre, or it might have been just outside the city centre. Well, it turns out that a 39-year-old man in Wolverhampton has been arrested. He is an Afghan asylum seeker. He hasn't been identified. I assume that's for the due process, but I hope he does get identified if he's found guilty. Um, and the three attackers have been arrested in Walthamstow, North London. They're said to be Romany travellers. So the speculation is that what police believe, I should say, is that the Afghan asylum seeker hired these three thugs to attack his wife. So whether they made a mistake in attacking the child or whether that was part of it, I don't know. But apparently, he had seen his wife on the news without her veil, without her head covering, and that enraged him. So this sounds very much like a classic honor crime, so called, but it's particularly depraved. I mean, it's depraved to throw acid in anybody's face, but a vulnerable child, what sort of monster would do something like that? It defies human comprehension. So I hope these three evil scumbags spend the rest of their miserable days behind bars. I really do. And as to the so-called father, I hope he gets a very, very, very lengthy custodial sentence as well. These are evil people. You know, people say you can't make that sort of moral philosophy on human beings. I believe you can. I believe evil exists, and I believe this is a good example of it. Animals. Um, I mean, that kid's going to be scarred for the rest of their life, and someone at some point is going to have to tell him you have this deformity because your father hated the idea that your mother didn't cover her face. And he's going to grow up in the UK, presumably, defies comprehension. Anyway, I mentioned extremism. This does come into the realm of political extremism or extremism that's a cultural extremism. I believe a major issue that we are facing is in the issue of integration. Um, when Angela Merkel allowed so many people to come into Germany at once, I believe that was one of the most reckless decisions made by any European leader in the last several decades. I really do. And it's not that Angela Merkel is stupid. I think it was more some sort of sense of. Some have suggested it was to help the German auto industry. I don't know what it was, but it was incredibly reckless. Have so many people come in at once, even if there was vetting, it would have been impossible to vet everyone. And we've seen the consequences. But the problem is when you talk about these things, the regressive left are in denial. You know, when you talk about integration, the likes of um, Yasmin Alibi Brown automatically get into a sort of mode of, well, you're pandering to the far right. This is the sort of rhetoric that fuels them. This is, you know, you're pandering to racism. We have to have an open discussion about this. We have to. And it makes me so angry that that the people won't accept what is so obvious. If people do not integrate, that leads to problems because you cannot honestly, with a straight face, insist that a culture that believes that if a woman dishonors a man, she should have acid thrown in her face is equal to liberal Western democracies. It's not equal. Cultures are not equal. You know, the idea that cultural values are equal is insane. And it's, I think that, like I say, the regressive left are so much focused on racism fighting the likes of the EDL and Britain First that they lose track of everything else. And that's what I dislike about them. Their inconsistency and yeah, their outright hypocrisy. Not only that is it's also the fact they shame anyone who doesn't agree with them as a racist. I'm not just talking about hardcore EDL supporters, I'm talking about anybody. They would call me a racist for daring to talk about this. And I think that is fine. Let them shout out racist. I'll shout out you're a card. You are a moral card. Because this is a problem. You probably know deep down it's a problem, but you will not talk about it for virtue signaling reasons, and it is utterly gutless. It's utterly, utterly gutless. Now, I've seen some encouraging signs. There has been indications that the Home Secretary is going to be more open in discussions around the demographics of situations like grooming gangs. That's encouraging because, and the fact it's coming from a British Pakistani Home Secretary is particularly encouraging because it makes it harder for the regressive left to shout racism. I've no doubt they'll still accuse him of pandering to the far right, but the thing is, of course, you get crimes in every community. Of course, you get good and bad people in every community. Um, that's common sense. But the fact of the matter is, you do get certain types of crime that are more prevalent in certain communities. So-called honor crimes, it is a cold hard fact. They are far, far, far more common within South Asian communities. It's just a fact. Um, and it's a fact that needs to be openly discussed without some blithering idiot saying, "Oh, you're pandering to the far right. Let's not talk about that." So the likes of Yasmin Alibi Brown, who I keep mentioning her because I feel she used to be kind of centrist and moderate. I feel she's become regressive left in recent years. Looking at the sort of articles that she's come out with, everything is about how awful racist Britain is, and it's. I think she's went down a very regressive path in terms of the way she thinks about things. I actually joined a group that she helped co-found, which was the British Muslims for Secular Democracy. She's now no longer affiliated with the specific Facebook group, as I understand it. There was a bit of a split, and I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs, but basically, there was loads of us who felt that there was a regressive path in the group that was starting to go down the line that it had actually set out to go against, i.e., this sort of victimhood narrative. Everything's Islamophobic, everything is racist. But then the sensible people in the group who recognised that there was problems with these things stayed, and yeah, there was a split basically. But that's how I'm familiar with Yasmin Alibi Brown, just in case anyone's wondering. But if you don't know who she is, she's a journalist, social commentator. She has had pieces in the Eye, among other publications. But there's others like Majid Nawaz who say that if these things are not spoken about, that is precisely what galvanizes the far right and the neo nationalists. So that brings me to the second case. In Edinburgh, a few days ago, there was a young Polish man. He was with his friend, and he was attacked by a 10 strong gang as he came out of a taxi, left in hospital. Left in hospital. And for what? Well, the police are suggesting it was because they overheard his Polish accent and they targeted him for that reason. Now, it is true that random thuggery can happen against anyone. I've been a victim of that sort of crime. Hello, I was an outsider where I live. My Northern Irish accent may have been at least partly a factor there. But the point is, anyone can be the victim of thuggery. the former ambassador, recently is an example of that. And there are there are other examples, but I think it's unquestionable that in recent years we have seen a rise in hate crimes. We have seen a rise of these sort of racialized gang attacks, and it's disgusting. I really think that that sort of crime, it's one of the most despicable because it's bad enough if an individual attacks someone, but to have a gang, it's the height of cowardice because nobody has a fighting chance to defend themselves in that situation. It's absolutely despicable. I think a judge presiding over this case should tell each and every one of them they are a worthless card. They need to put them down, make them feel worthless, because anyone who's capable of that is dangerous. But it is an act of cowardice as well. It's depraved and it indicates a very sick mind, but it's also the action of a card because it's not like two boxers going into a ring where they're facing each other. One guy wins, one guy doesn't, but they haven't at least at least it's man on man. At least it's not a situation like this where one guy is beaten up by. I just think it's evil, and I imagine that young guy is gonna have flashbacks and mental health problems for a long time afterwards. But it wouldn't be good enough to just have the ringleaders caught. Each one of them needs to be hunted down. And if the ringleaders won't talk, I say beat it out of them. I didn't say that. But yeah, I wouldn't. I've zero sympathy with animals like this. I really think it's the sort of crime that makes my blood boil. I've been attacked, not quite like that. I haven't been left in hospital, but I have been. I've had some rough times. Inner city area I used to live. I was targeted by groups of people, and it's very scary because no matter how assertive you are, no matter how physically strong you are, a gang is a gang. You can't take on 10 people. So it's scary, but it's depraved. Anyway, that's also extremism because, like I say, there has been this rise, and Home Office figures show it, a rise in hate crime. Now, I'm not going to get into the realm of whether or not Brexit is to blame because I know Leave people get very worked up by that. They say, oh, you can't blame Brexit. Well, I'm not convinced by that. Um, Certainly, I would not suggest that people decide to go and carry out a racist attack because we're leaving the EU. But I do think on some level it might have galvanized them a bit more. That's my gut feeling. Um, what else can we consider? Well, I've mentioned these two cases. One of them, we're talking about lack of integration. We're talking about lack of vetting as well. I think when people come into this country, I've known asylum seekers from Iran, Christians. They speak pretty decent English. They clearly have decent values. They don't look on women as lesser citizens or anything like that. They're the sort of people that I think there is a valid case to be providing refuge to. They're Christians fleeing Iran. But when you get people who may have some claim to persecution, but they themselves have some regressive mindsets, we must put the safety of our society first. So if they're sent back, and there was a recent case where a young Swedish student refused to sit down until the Afghan asylum seeker on the plane, apparently he was being sent back and he was going to face death. She was making a protest. She was escorted off the plane. As was pointed out in the United States, she would have immediately been arrested. Now, I don't know the very specifics of that case. It may be that that Afghan asylum seeker did have a legitimate reason to stay, and the authorities were being heavy-handed. I don't know, but I couldn't help thinking she struck me as a sort of very naive millennial student who, would automatically be on the radar for looking out for racists, but be blind to regressive cultural problems in other parts of the world, particularly in the South Asian region. Because those sort of, I'm not, I'm just saying that was my gut feeling. I don't know all the details of that case, but you do get people out there who they'll be very vocal about neo nationalists, but they'll be very silent about honor crimes, and I think they're cards. If you believe strongly in something, that's okay. If you hate the EDL and all that, okay, that's people have their conviction, they have strong views, so that's fine. But at least be consistent. Don't then act as an apologist or an appeaser of other forms of extremism. Now, about the ADL, Britain First, and this rise of neo nationalism, I don't think it's harmless. And I think some on the right are guilty of downplaying this. I think there is violence that comes with that. We saw it with Anders Breivik, and we've seen it in other cases. And it does create an environment where you get these sort of racialized attacks like the one in Edinburgh. So I don't think it's a simple case there, just a kind of response to the rise of Islamic extremism. I think that's part of it. Inevitably, they're going to grow, they're going to fill the vacuum that the establishment is being perceived to ignore. So when the establishment is politically correct about talking about regressive cultural practices and Islamic extremism, then they fill the vacuum. And this is why I get so frustrated with the regressive left, because when mainstream politicians or social commentators who have no affiliation with the EDL or Britain First actually do talk about these things, then the gutless regressive left immediately try to shame them and say, oh, you're pandering to the far right. Don't talk about that. It's just like, to be honest, I have no respect for them. I have no respect for their weak set of values because they virtue signal on one hand. They like to be all, oh, we believe in plurality and diversity, and we respect everyone equally, and except they don't. They talk about these things, but they talk about the rise of neo nationalism, but they will not talk about Islamic extremism. Put it this way: in 3 years, Jeremy Corbyn is the king of regressive left. In 3 years, has that man mentioned once the problem of Islamic extremism by name? No. Shamefully, all Jeremy Corbyn has done is talk about terrorism, and he condemns it and he says how awful it is. But this is a man who is the personification of regressive left. So is John McDonnell. That's why, in my view, they should never be in government. But not to go off on a tangent. Unfortunately, I do think that extremism is on the rise in this country. It's extremism that is Islamic extremism, which is political. It's a cultural extremism, i.e., regressive cultural values. And yes, it is also the rise of neo nationalist extremism, which does have very ugly, racist, blood and soil nationalist inclinations. So, what is the response to this? We have to have an open, honest discussion about these things. Okay, you might not exactly agree with the things I'm saying, but if your first response is to say racist, then you're a blithering idiot, and you're not contributing anything to the discussion. You might debate, for example, a specific angle I'm looking at. Okay, fair enough, but that really works me up when people talk about when they throw out these isms casually. It does exist, but it, if you cannot have open discussion about these things, then where are we going to go from that? It's my concern. So we have to have open discussion. We have to recognize the problems. We have to recognize the problems brought about by a lack of integration. Um, it's a very real issue, and I cannot comprehend how anyone could be against that. It's not again. It's not about saying everyone has to be carbon copies of one another. It's not going against diversity or celebrating the benefits that diversity can bring. It's about saying that we also have to be very assertive in not tolerating regressive cultural practices that we should not welcome to these shores, that we should not say is okay. And also, I think sentencing is a big factor. There needs to be, I mean, that first case in Worcester, that has to result in very, very lengthy custodial sentences, otherwise it's worthless. And the gang attack in Edinburgh, it wouldn't be good enough if just the ringleaders got a few years and the others got off the hook. They should force them to reveal the identity of the others. If you overthink these things, it can get very depressing, but we also have to think about it with a clear head, look at the problems, and discuss them rationally but firmly. That's what I believe in. Thanks for watching.